When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. Pennsylvania rarely saw rain that clung like this, but tonight it poured over the small town as if someone up there refused to let go. Caleb Morgan, 18, gripped the steering wheel of his battered sedan. The wipers scraped frantically across the windshield. Streetlights stretched into long golden smears. The back road toward Wexler Lake sank into darkness like ink bleeding across a page. His phone buzzed in the console. One unread message. Caleb caught only the sender's name, Daniel. Something in his chest tightened. For the past month, Daniel had been there, at the edge of his vision, in the parking lot, down the hallway, near the football bleachers, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Caleb told himself it was coincidence. He hated the feeling of being followed. The radio shifted to a weather alert. Heavy rainfall. Avoid unnecessary travel. Caleb switched it off. Silence dropped in, heavy and close. Only the patter of rain and the old engine's hum remained. He thought about the upcoming graduation, the smiles in senior year photos, and tried not to think about the old posts still floating somewhere online. Jokes launched like darts that never came back. The internet didn't forget, but Caleb always pretended to. He turned down a narrow road skirting the pine forest. Fog and rain blurred together into a silver curtain. His headlights swept over slick tree trunks, a leaning speed limit sign. Visibility shrank to a few dozen feet. Caleb eased off the gate thus. Then he saw someone, standing in the middle of the road. No umbrella, hooded sweatshirt soaked through. The hood shadowed half the face, but the stance was unmistakable. Caleb slammed the brakes on instinct. The car skated across the slick asphalt, the tires biting at nothing. Raindrops seemed to hang midair. Headlight glare spilled over wet pavement. The figure lifted his head. Not fear, cold, glacial calm. Daniel? Caleb wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or just thought it. The figure didn't move aside. Instead, he stepped forward half a pace, as if asking a silent question. Do you remember? The wheels locked. A sound like metal grinding over bone, the acrid stink of burnt rubber. The steering wheel jerked from Caleb's grip. The world tilted sideways. In the split second before impact, Caleb glimpsed his own reflection in the rearview mirror. Young, exhausted, eyes wide with confusion, as if he'd just heard his name whispered in a crowded room. The crash wasn't cinematic. It was short, heavy, final. A period at the end of a sentence. Then darkness. Darkness had a sound. Faintly a school bell echoed from somewhere far away. The dull clang of locker doors, as if someone had just been shoved into them. Caleb opened his eyes. The rain was gone. The car was gone. He stood in a long hallway, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, the air smelling of chalk dust and old paint. On the wall, a poster read, "Be kind," its corners curled and torn. At the far end, a single door stood ajar. Beyond it, a blackness thick enough to swallow sight. A voice slid across the ceiling, coming from nowhere. Caleb Morgan. His throat felt scraped dry. Who's there? The court of the soul begins. The hallway ended where the light did. Beyond the ajar door lay a thickness of dark that felt less like absence and more like a presence. Something dense, listening. Caleb didn't want to step closer, but the fluorescent tubes above him buzzed once, twice, and guttered out. The last light died with a tiny chirp. Instinct pulled him forward. The door opened the rest of the way with the sound of paper sliding across paper, and the dark took him in. He expected cold. Instead, the air held a classroom's mild warmth. the way a space keeps the temperature of bodies that have only just left. He blinked and the room swam into view, a long table of worn wood, 12 high-backed chairs arranged around it, and a single metal chair near the end. Lighter, mortal, out of place. The walls were not walls so much as panels of matte slate that absorbed every reflection. No windows, no seams. The ceiling suspended a thin grid of lights that shed neither glare nor shadows, as though they illuminated the air from within. He spoke because silence felt like being pinned. "Hello?" The word fell and did not echo. The room did not return it. At the far end of the table, a lectern waited, tall as a pulpit, its surface carved with little hatch marks and half-faded initials, the only evidence that something like hands had touched it. On the lectern lay a large ledger bound in cracked leather. The leather had been scuffed so often that it shone. A pen rested crosswise atop it, the nib pointed toward the empty chairs. Caleb took a step toward the ledger, then froze. Out of the corner of his eye, something moved. Not a figure, but a crease in the room, as if space itself had breathed. A chair pulled itself out from the table with a polite scrape. Another followed, then a third. The voice came again, no louder than before, no softer. It seemed to know exactly how much space the room had, and filled only that much. "Caleb Morgan." He turned in a slow circle. "Who are you?" "The court," the voice said, "and the clerk, and the floorboards, if you like. Names are ornaments. We are the function." "I don't understand." "That is permitted." The chairs finished arranging themselves. Their seats faced the empty end of the table, as though waiting for a lecture to start. The single metal chair stayed where it was, the lone human note. A sliver of panic slid under Caleb's ribs like a cold knife. "I'm dead." The words no longer shocked him. The idea had already touched down somewhere accepted, like a plane that had been circling and finally found a runway. He had died on the road by the lake. He had died with Daniel looking on. And now he was here. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Not want," said the voice. "Procedure." He didn't move, but the metal chair scraped back from the table as if invited by an unseen host. The ledger's pen trembled once and settled. Something in the room looked at him without eyes. He sat. The chair's metal was neither warm nor cold, as if it didn't recognize temperature. He laced his fingers in his lap to stop them from shaking. His knuckle bore the tiny scar he'd gotten sophomore year from punching a locker in showy anger. He rubbed it with his thumb, a reflex, and felt a pulse of shame. Shame came fast here, uninvited, like a smell you can't scrub off. "Is this," he tried again, "is this hell?" The voice considered. "That term is a story told in many rooms. This is a room that will tell you yours." A sound, soft as a match being struck, ticked behind him. He turned. The blank panels of the wall seemed to cloud from within, like breath fogging a mirror. Shapes gathered, bleeding into perspective. A hallway, lockers dented by decades of small cruelties, a row of bulletin boards with curling flyers for a winter formal 2 years past. The image had depth, as though he could walk into it. His own stomach flipped in recognition. "Stop," he said. "I'm not ready." "No one is ready," the court said, almost gently. "Readiness is for stories that allow rehearsals. This is testimony." The image evaporated back to slate. He swallowed. "If this is a trial, where is my lawyer?" "You may represent yourself," the room said. "You may accuse yourself. You may acquit yourself. None of these will matter. The verdict is lived, not spoken." "You mean I'm guilty?" "Silence, then. Guilt is a verb here." He wanted to laugh. Something about the room's bureaucratic poise veered toward absurd, but the sound in his chest bent into a cough. He had the urge to stand, to walk, to test the edges of this place and find a seam. He pushed to his feet. The room permitted it. He walked along the perimeter. Up close, the walls weren't smooth. They held a grain like paper, and beneath the grain a faint thrum, as if a distant generator hummed out of sight. He pressed his palm to the surface. It was neither yielding nor firm. His hand met it and also didn't. He moved his hand sideways and felt a whisper of resistance, as though his skin were being read. When he looked back at his palm, a gray dust had gathered on the whorls of his fingerprints. He wiped them on his jeans. The dust did not transfer. He laughed once, in disbelief and fear. Okay, cool, magic drywall. At the lectern, the pen lifted off the ledger by a thumb's width and then settled back down. Proceed, the court said. How? He gestured toward the empty chairs. To whom? To the record. A pause. You are here because cause and consequence require alignment. The living court has taken one path. This room takes another. Daniel, he said. Saying the name out loud triggered a small ripple under the skin of the room, as though he had spoken into a lake. He planned it. Daniel Hughes acted out of grief and made a choice the living will weigh against statute and precedent, the voice replied. Those weights are not yours. Your weights are the ones you placed on others. We will pick them up. I didn't. He stopped. Lies evaporated here. He could feel the heat off them, premature like bread burned before it met the oven. The room was not forcing truth. It simply made falseness heavy. I was a kid, he tried instead. We all say things. We joke. It's high school. The room waited. Waiting had weight, too. He thought of the first time he made a hallway laugh. The memory rose unasked, with the sensory richness of a smell, the snap of a locker, the little wind of bodies turning toward him. The joke had been clever and cruel. Clever mattered then. Cruel just came with it, like the price tag sewn under the seam. He had chosen those words precisely because they cut. He had wanted the cut. He had wanted the red smile of power that appeared in the faces around him when the cut landed. He found himself back in the metal chair without remembering the crossing. If I say I'm sorry, he asked, does it? Sorry names a door, the court said. Whether it opens is not up to the mouth that speaks it. He flinched, though the voice wasn't unkind. He stared at the ledger on the lectern. The leather looked older now, as if time accelerated in his gaze. He imagined names pressed into those pages like fossils. How many? How often did the room fill? A ridiculous part of him wondered about scheduling, whether the afterlife had a calendar app, whether the clerk sent reminders. Dear Caleb, your soul's hearing is at 7. Please arrive 5 minutes early. Bring questions. The thought arrived and left, embarrassed. May I ask questions, he said. You may. A softness again, like fleece against skin. Questions are bridges here, not weapons. What happens to me after? After this, do I get sent somewhere? If a place is necessary, a place will be made. If a path is necessary, a path will appear. If understanding is necessary, you will be given as much understanding as you can carry without turning it into a shield. He swallowed. That sounds like punishment. It sounds like weight. Weight teaches balance. The chairs at the table were still empty. No faces, no jurors, only absence shaped like presence. Who sits there? He asked. Sometimes no one, sometimes everyone. You will not be asked to convince them. You will be asked to see. One of the chairbacks shifted. For a second, the wood took on a human outline, the way clouds do when you stare too long. He recognized, or believed he recognized, the slope of a shoulder. It was too quick to be sure. See what? What you did, the court said. What I did was words. The court did not sigh, but the room gave the sensation of a sigh, a subtle relaxing of angles. Words are levers. They move things you cannot lift by hand. He closed his eyes. I was trying to be funny. And were you? Yes. And what else were you? He opened his eyes. The ledger's pen had rolled a fraction, as if taking note. He remembered the laugh like heat on his skin. He remembered Ethan's shoulders narrowing under the weight of it, as if he could make himself small enough to slip out of the world's grip. He had seen it then and turned away because the laugh felt better. Powerful, he said, and felt the truth of the word too quickly to retract it. He had liked the weight of attention, the quick transaction of status purchased with someone else's quiet. Power enjoys the disguise of humor, the court said mildly. He found his breath returning in shallow sips. He looked down at his hands. They were steady now. He did not know if the calm was his or the room's. The not knowing was, strangely, a relief. He was tired of being the engine of everything he felt. The wall clouded again. This time the image did not form into a hallway, but into a table like the one in this room. On it sat a phone, his phone, turned face up. He recognized the hairline crack across the corner he'd been meaning to fix. The screen lit with a notification. A message preview slid into view. "You're not funny, no name." Just that sentence, small and plain. He couldn't remember ever receiving it. He waited to see more. The image held, then faded. "I didn't get that," he said, defensive without exactly wanting to be. "I never saw you receive more than what your screen shows," the voice replied. "The body is a screen too. Other people read you on it." He pictured himself in the cafeteria, senior fall, laughter like shrapnel tinkling across the tabletops. Him standing, presenting his joke like a hinge that could open the room, the way even the teachers smiled then as long as he kept his knives wrapped in wit. He told himself then that he was punching up, or sideways, or nowhere at all. He told himself the target could take it. It's just words. And it had been so easy to find the seam in someone's armor. People wore their seams on the outside. He had learned to pull. "You will be shown," the court said. "But first, you will listen. Stand at the lectern." He obeyed. The distance between the metal chair and the lectern could not have been more than 8 steps. It took him 30. Bass was not consistent here. Even the grain of the floor lengthened when he wasn't looking and shortened when he was. By the time he reached the lectern, his breath had warmed his upper lip and cooled again. Up close, the ledger smelled like old glue and those thrift store paperbacks whose pages browned at the edges and left a faint line on your thumb. He put his hand on the cover. It thrummed under his palm, faint as a heartbeat in winter. "Open it," the court said. He did. The pages were filled with lines he couldn't read, letters he recognized arranged in patterns he didn't. It felt like looking at English from a distance, slightly rotated. Then the marks reorganized themselves as if deciding to be merciful. He scanned the first entry. Attendance. The handwriting was precise, without flourish. He turned the page. Motion, admissibility of memory. Hallway, senior year, Friday, 10:12 a.m. He swallowed. He turned again. Exhibit A, laughter, provenance, group, initiator, Caleb Morgan. The words did not accuse. They did not have to. "Is this all me?" he whispered. "Today," the court said, "you will add to it. Your handwriting or ours, it makes no difference." "I don't want to." "You will not be forced. Refusal writes itself." The pen slid toward his fingers. He did not take it. He stood very still and felt the pressure gather not on his skin, but in the air around him. The room waited. The waiting accumulated like dust. He understood that waiting could be a kind of mercy. It gave shape to choosing. It made the absence of force visible. He picked up the pen. "What do I write?" "What you remember that the record lacks," the court said. "Not to excuse, not to elaborate for the sake of decoration. To see what your memory does when asked to walk in a straight line." He touched the nib to the paper. Ink appeared. He wrote, "I knew where the seam was." He paused. The sentence looked strange in his hand, too honest to have come from him. But it had. He wrote again. "Sometimes I aimed exactly there on purpose." His throat tightened. He lifted the pen. The line of ink shone and turned matte. "That is sufficient." "Oh, no," the court said, and the relief that washed through him made him realize he had been bracing for a blow. He set the pen down. A chair scraped, not the metal one of the high-backed. A shape occupied it, not quite a person, more the idea of one. Outline first, then shadow, then color flooding in like a slow sunrise. The face was clear for less than a second, but in that second he recognized Mark, the kid from sophomore chemistry whose jacket sleeves smelled faintly of bleach because he worked nights at his aunt's laundromat. Caleb had once locked Mark's backpack to a bleacher with a bike chain during practice. He hadn't even said anything cutting that time. He'd just done it and laughed when Mark cried, trying to free it before the late bus left. The not quite Mark looked at him without accusation. The lack of anger hurt more. Is he? Caleb began. Witness, the court said. Not to speak, to be seen. Another chair filled. This outline blurred and reformed into a different boy, one Caleb couldn't place immediately, then could. The freshman whose stutter he had mimicked once, just once because the imitation had come to his tongue with the ease of breath. The room did not show him that moment. Not yet. It only seated the witness. How many? Caleb asked, almost a plea. As many as it takes to match the weight. He pressed his palms to the edge of the lectern, his knuckles bleached white. He looked down at the ledger again, and without wanting to saw a future index. Exhibit C, locker, provenance, metal, initiator, crowd. Exhibit D, phone, provenance, network, initiator, Caleb Morgan, share. He closed the book. The cover hummed once under his hands and quieted. Please, he said. He did not know who he addressed, court, witnesses, himself. You are in the room you asked for, the court answered. I would never ask. Every act is a request, the voice said, not unkind. You asked to feel large. You asked for the sound of laughter in your lungs. You asked the world to arrange itself around your joke. The world granted you that request. It is now answering the part you didn't know you asked, to see what that arrangement can. He thought of Daniel again, not in the road, but years earlier, walking with Ethan between classes. Daniel always walked on the outer side, between Ethan and the hallway. He hadn't noticed then that Daniel's body had already learned how to become a door. He noticed now. The noticing hurt. Will Daniel be here? He asked quietly. If necessary, said the court, but necessity is not spectacle. He nodded. He had no idea what that meant. He understood enough. Spectacle day had been his medium. He would not get it now. Sit, the court instructed. He did. The metal chair did not creak. He folded his hands again. The first session will be preparatory, the voice said. You will hear. Hearing is a muscle that atrophies when it is used only to rehearse one's turn to speak. A sound entered the room, not exactly audio, more the suggestion of a hallway's acoustics, the metallic echo of lockers and the hard tiles bounce. Then, layered on that, the low hum of 1,000 ordinary days, sneakers squeaking, binder rings clicking, laughter rolling and breaking and rolling again. Caleb felt it enter him. It did not hurt. It deprived him, which in some ways was worse. It made him aware of the shape of his hearing, of the places his attention had patrolled and the gaps it had left unchecked. The hum narrowed, focused, tuned. A particular laughter separated itself from the rest. His, older by a year, but his, and spun in the air like a coin flicked and caught. It is only sound, the court said. You will want it to be only sound. Keep listening until it stops being only sound. He did. The laughter, now that he paid attention to its interior, carried weight like coins in a pocket. It clinked. Beneath the clink, carried on its back, a small intake of breath, aborted. The person who hadn't been able to swallow their sound of hurt in time. He hadn't heard it then, not really. He'd stepped on it without feeling it compress underfoot. Now the sound returned, tiny, insistent, like a mouse in the wall. He listened until it became louder than his laughter. He did not know if the room had amplified it or if finally he had made space for it. He realized he was crying only when tears cooled his upper lip. He wiped them on, startled, as though someone else's face had been placed over his. That is sufficient for the preparatory session, the court said, and the layered hallway hum fell away. The chairs at the table held their witnesses, patient as furniture. They did not shift. They did not accuse. They did not absolve. Their job, for now, was to be. You will sleep, the court said, because you are still shaped like a body. Tomorrow, testimony. Sleep where? He almost smiled. The question felt absurd. The room's air tasted like chalk. The corner of the room, which had not held a corner a moment earlier, offered a low couch. No, not a couch. More a padded bench like the nurse's office bed from elementary school. Vinyl, clean, impersonal. He hadn't seen it appear. Perhaps it had always been there and he hadn't needed it yet. The floor between him and the bench shortened mercifully to normal distance. He stood and hesitated. Will you? He didn't know how to end the sentence. Be here? Watch me? Turn off? The court did not answer, and for the first time that felt right. He walked to the bench. He lay down. The vinyl held his shape for a second and then forgot it. He folded his hands on his chest, then moved them to his sides. The lights above dimmed, not to darkness, but to enough. He shut his eyes. He had expected nightmare or the sudden reel of memory. Instead, sleep came like weather arriving over the hills. Not peace, basically, but a blanket of sameness that allowed him to rest without approval. The room did not bless him or judge him. It contained him. In the last seconds before he dropped under, he thought of the "Be Kind" poster in the hallway with the torn corner. He imagined, for no reason he could name, himself standing on a chair with a roll of tape, pressing the corner flat. He imagined the tape sticking. He imagined stepping down and nobody clapping. The thought warmed him, then passed. He slept. When he woke, he did not know how much later. The room had not changed. That was the first mercy the day offered. The world stayed where he'd left it. The ledger remained closed. The witnesses occupied their chairs. The court waited. He sat up, throat thick with the residue of dreams he could not bring to mind. "Good morning," he said to no one and to the room. The phrase felt both wrong and comforting. It created a rhythm that his body recognized. "Proceed," the court said, and its voice made the air smooth like a grain of wood sanded down. He stood and returned to the metal chair. He did not ask for breakfast or water or a bathroom. Needs here were quieter, or he was. "Caleb Morgan," the court said, as if they had not already begun, as if proceedings always begin now. "For the record, you have been informed of the nature of this room." "I have," he said. "You may request clarity at any time," the voice continued. "Clarity will be given to the measure that it does not become a narcotic." "I understand," he said, and found that he did, in the way you understand the rules of a game you haven't yet played. "Then we begin," the court said. The wall across from him clouded one more time, and the hallway began to gather itself out of fog like a conscience coalescing. Somewhere beneath the surface of his skin, his pulse counted the distance between then and now. He steadied his breath. He did not ask to stop. He would listen first. He would be made to see. And for the first time, faint but real, he wanted exactly that. The wall's fog thickened until it was all Caleb could see. The matte black dissolved into a gray depth, and the gray resolved into color, faded linoleum, scuffed 1,000 times over, lockers dented like they'd taken small blows in 100 forgotten arguments. Somewhere, fluorescent lights hummed their flat song. He knew this place instantly. He had walked this hallway 1,000 times in life, sometimes alone, more often flanked by the chorus of boys who orbited him because his voice drew attention the way a match draws oxygen. Now, though, the hallway did not wait for him to step in. It pulled him. His body tilted forward without choice. His shoes hit the tile. The smell of cleaning fluid and teenage sweat rose up, thick and almost comforting in its familiarity. For one suspended moment, he thought maybe this would be a simple replay, like watching a video of yourself from high school. He was wrong. The court's voice, close but without direction, threaded into his ear. "Testimony is not observation. You will stand where the weight fell." The tug came again, and his sight realigned. He was no longer looking through his own high school eyes. He was lower to the ground, his shoulders narrower, his breath shallow in a chest that didn't quite fill. His hands clutched the straps of a backpack as though the nylon could anchor him to the earth. The skin on those knuckles was paler than his own. The breath he took was not his own either. It carried a tremor that reached down into the stomach. "I'm Ethan." The realization was not thought so much as knowledge, bone deep and inarguable. He looked down and saw shoes that weren't his, cheap canvas, fraying at the toes. He shifted, and the right shoe squeaked in a way that made him flinch, because any sound in a hallway like this could be an invitation. The memory unfolded in perfect fidelity. The buzz of students changing classes filled the air, locker doors slamming, laughter spiking here and there. At the far end, Caleb, the old Caleb, leaned against a locker, talking to two of his friends. He watched himself from the other end of the hall, the way prey might watch a predator, measuring distance, predicting movement. The Caleb leaning against the locker spotted Ethan, spotted him, and his mouth curved in a smile that wasn't warmth. It was the opening move in a game only one side had agreed to play. From inside Ethan's body, Caleb felt his own pulse spike. The body wanted to turn down another hall, to disappear into a bathroom stall, but the moment to act had passed. The gaze had landed. Once it landed, there was no changing course without confirming to everyone that you were avoiding something. And avoidance was its own kind of bait. The younger Caleb stepped away from the locker and walked toward Ethan, slow, casual, hands in pockets. Behind him, his friends leaned in, grinning in anticipation. A couple of other students noticed too, their conversations thinning as they tuned to the spectacle about to happen. From the Ethan body, Caleb tried to slow his steps, but the legs kept moving forward because stopping would mean being overtaken. Every sense was heightened now. The rustle of a jacket sleeve, the sharp tang of disinfectant on the floor, the metallic rattle of a pencil case inside the backpack. "Hey, Carter!" His own voice called down the hall, sharp, clear, pitched to carry. The sound hit him in the chest like a thrown object. Ethan's. His mouth stayed closed. His eyes dropped to the floor, a survival reflex learned too quickly. "Come here a sec," younger Caleb said, falling into step beside him without waiting for agreement. The smell of his own cologne, too strong, pushed into the Ethan body's nose. "Got something for you." From inside Ethan's skull, Caleb screamed silently, "Don't do it, don't!" But memory obeyed only itself. The younger Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, already crumpled, already dirty from being handled too many times. "This," younger Caleb announced to no one in particular, "is poetry." He opened the paper and began to read. It was Ethan's handwriting. Caleb knew because he, that Caleb, had lifted it from the inside of a math notebook when Ethan had left his bag unattended. He read a few lines, earnest, awkward lines about loneliness, about feeling invisible. They were not written for an audience, but for the relief of a private page. The hallway reacted exactly as the younger Caleb wanted. Laughter and staccato bursts. A whistle from someone leaning against the lockers, mocking oohs and ahs, as though the words had been some overblown declaration of love. From Ethan's body, Caleb felt the blow land, not on skin, but in the space just beneath the breastbone, where breath is stored. His cheeks burned, his eyes watered. He tried to keep his face blank, because any reaction would feed the room. But the body betrayed him. The blush deepened, the mouth twitched, the eyes flicked to the floor and back up again, as if searching for an escape hatch in the air. The younger Caleb tossed the paper back into Ethan's hands and said something. He couldn't hear it yet, the court muffling the exact words. But whatever it was drew another round of laughter. The laughter was the worst part. Not the cruelty of the words, but the pleasure they brought to everyone else. Standing inside Ethan's skin, Caleb understood for the first time that humiliation wasn't a sharp pain. It was a slow suffocation, a thickening of the air until it felt like you couldn't breathe without drawing more attention. The scene froze. Students hung mid-laugh, mouths open, eyes bright with the high of being on the safe side of the line. The younger Caleb's smirk was fixed in place, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening for applause. "Hold here," the court's voice said. Caleb's vision detached from Ethan's body, rising up and away until he floated above the frozen tableau. The hallway was no longer just a hallway. Its tiles stretched far in every direction, lockers multiplying like cells under a microscope. Every one of those lockers contained another moment like this. Small acts magnified in the memory of the one who bore them. "See," the court said, "how the moment expands beyond its making." The frozen figure shifted slightly, and the sound returned, not as it had been, but as a layered echo. Caleb heard the laughter, but beneath it came the sound of Ethan's breathing, rapid and shallow, and beneath that, a thud like a slow drum beat, the sound of a heart learning to carry shame. Caleb wanted to turn away. He wanted to shout that he hadn't meant it to be that bad, that it was just high school stupid, that Ethan should have shrugged it off. But those excuses shriveled before they even reached his tongue. He was listening to the cost now, and the plot did not care about intention. The scene dissolved. The hallway's colors bled into gray, the gray into black. Caleb was back in the metal chair at the long table. The witnesses, Mark, the stuttered boy, remained in their seats. First testimony complete, the court said. Do you contest its truth? Caleb's voice felt small. No. Then it will stand, the court said. We proceed. The wall began to fog again. The wall clouded again, the gray blooming outward like ink in water. This time, Caleb didn't resist the pull. His body leaned forward as if the chair itself tipped him toward the image. The scene sharpened, the school courtyard in early spring. The sun was out but pale, the kind that gives light without warmth. Concrete benches flanked the walkway, and the air smelled faintly of mulch from the garden beds the maintenance crew had just turned over. Students milled around, some sitting in circles on the grass, others leaning against railings, eating from brown paper bags. Caleb knew this moment before it fully revealed itself. He could feel it in the strange heaviness of his chest, in the way the air seemed to carry a faint hum of anticipation. The younger Caleb, that Caleb then stood near the edge of a bench, phone in hand, showing something to two boys beside him. They leaned in, shoulders touching, heads tilted toward the glowing screen. A smirk curved younger Caleb's mouth. One boy slapped him on the back in approval. The pull came again. Caleb felt his sight shift, and then he was no longer looking through his own eyes. The air was heavier now, the colors sharper at the edges. His body felt different, taller, stronger across the shoulders. His hands were balled loosely in his hoodie pocket. This isn't Ethan, he realized. This is Daniel. The Daniel body stood about 20 feet away, back half leaning against a railing. His vantage point gave him a perfect, unobstructed view of the trio huddled over the phone. Caleb, inside Daniel, watched as one of the boys laughed loud enough to turn heads. Dude, you're savage, the boy said. Younger Caleb grinned, thumb tapping the phone screen. The Daniel body shifted its weight but didn't move closer. Inside, Caleb felt the war between wanting to intervene and knowing exactly what that would cost. He could feel the instinctive calculation. Step in now and the spotlight turns. Don't. And the scene plays out the way it always does. From this angle, Caleb saw what was on the phone screen. A photo of Ethan in the cafeteria, mid-bite into a sandwich, caught at an unflattering angle. Someone, Caleb remembered now, had added a crude caption in red text before posting it online. He hadn't even thought twice when he hit share. It had been funny in that sharp, throwaway way humor often is in high school, made to sting, then vanish. But seeing it now through Daniel's eyes, Caleb understood that it hadn't vanished at all. Daniel's gaze didn't leave the phone, not because he was curious, but because he was memorizing. Every detail, every smirk, every approving nod from the boys beside him. Daniel's jaw was tight, the muscles ticking once before he turned away. His hands stayed in his pockets. Caleb could feel the way the tension traveled up his arms, into his neck, settling like a stone behind his eyes. The court's voice entered the moment, threading through it like wind through a crack in the window. This is the angle you never turned to see. The Daniel body began walking away, but his pace wasn't hurried. He cut across the courtyard, past the fountain that hadn't worked since fall, and out toward the side entrance of the school. Caleb felt the pressure of thoughts moving under the surface. Dark, organized, the way river currents can be invisible until they pull you under. The scene shifted abruptly, and Caleb found himself in the locker-lined hallway again, but now the perspective was high, almost at the ceiling. He was looking down on the entire scene of the poetry incident from Chapter 3. Only now he could see Daniel standing at the far end of the hall, near the exit doors. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, but his eyes were locked on Ethan. He had been there the whole time. Every laugh, every word, every glance toward Ethan had been witnessed. Caleb felt the weight of that gaze now, not as Ethan had, full of embarrassment, but as Daniel carried it, a silent cataloging, a quiet intake of the injury, storing it like ammunition for a war not yet declared. The scene froze. The hallway was suspended mid-laughter, and Daniel's eyes, still fixed on Ethan, burned in the stillness. The court's voice returned. Harm is rarely a single blow. It is the layering of moments until the structure gives way. You see the moment of collapse, but not the architecture beneath. Caleb's throat tightened. So you're saying I built it, layer by layer. Silence. Did I kill him? The words slipped out before he could stop them. The court answered, cause and effect are a chain. You forged some links, others were added by different hands. But you knew the weight you placed. You cannot be surprised when the chain pulls. The image collapsed back into black. Caleb was once again at the long table. The witnesses hadn't moved, but the air around them felt heavier, as if they had absorbed what he had just seen. He looked down at his hands. Daniel was there the whole time, he murmured. There is always someone there, the court replied. Some see and leave, some see and remember, some see and act. Caleb thought of the road, the rain, the figure standing in the headlights, unflinching. He thought of how calm Daniel had looked in that final moment, not as a man caught in rage, but as one carrying out a decision already made. The court spoke again, its voice unchanging. This witness will return. And Caleb understood that Daniel's testimony was still ahead, and that it would be worse than anything he had seen so far. The wall began to fog once more. The fog came faster this time, curling outward like breath in frozen air. Caleb didn't need the court to tell him what was coming. His chest already felt the premonition, heavy and metallic. When the scene resolved, it was inside a small bedroom, Ethan's bedroom. The walls were pale blue, half covered with faded posters of indie bands. A desk cluttered with notebooks and a flickering lamp sat against the far wall. Outside the single window, snow fell in the thin, weightless way it does when the air is too still to carry it. Caleb's perspective shifted again, and he understood, before the sensation fully set in, that he was inside Ethan's body once more. The air was cool on bare arms, the sleeves of a worn t-shirt loose around thin shoulders. His breathing was shallow, but not from exertion. This was the kind of breath you take when each inhale is debated before it happens. The clock on the desk read 6:12 a.m. The house was silent except for the faint hum of a heater cycling on and off somewhere below. Caleb, Ethan, sat at the desk, fingers curled around a pen, staring at a half-written note. He could feel the heaviness in Ethan's wrists, the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much for too long. His eyes kept darting to the phone lying face down beside the notebook. Every time they landed there, something twisted in his chest, a physical ache that Caleb couldn't separate from Ethan's. The court's voice came low, almost reverent. You will not be shielded from this. From the other side of the note, Caleb saw the words already written. I don't want to make anyone feel guilty. I just can't. The sentence broke off mid-line. The pen hovered, then lowered. He could feel Ethan's mind circling, touching on small memories. Laughter in the hallways, whispers behind lockers, the scrape of sneakers against tile when someone stepped aside to avoid brushing against him. And there, again and again, the face of Caleb Morgan, smirking like he'd found a private joke. The sound of snow brushing the window was louder than it should have been. It filled the pauses between heartbeats. A floorboard creaked in the hall, maybe a parent moving toward the kitchen. Ethan's hand tightened on the pen, then loosened. He reached for the phone instead, flipping it over. There it was, the photo from the cafeteria, the caption still glaring in red text. Under it, the laughing emoji reactions stacked like a line of little knives. Caleb felt the sting, pure chemical, and wanted to recoil, to pull away from the phone, but Ethan's body didn't move. He just stared, absorbing it like a blow that had already landed hours ago, but still echoed through the ribs. The note on the desk remained unfinished. When Ethan finally rose from the chair, the weight in his chest followed. His steps across the room were slow, almost tentative, as though each was a test to see if he'd change his mind. But there was no turn, no hesitation. Caleb tried to close Ethan's eyes, tried to look away from what he knew was next. But the court's presence held him steady. The perspective forced him to feel the tremor in Ethan's hands, the dull acceptance in his lungs, the narrowing of thought to a single point of stillness. And then, nothing. The scene didn't show the act itself. Instead, the room emptied of Ethan's weight. The air shifted, and Caleb felt himself standing just inside the doorway. Only now he wasn't in Ethan's body. He was in someone else's, Daniel's. Daniel's hand was on the doorknob, knuckles pale from gripping too hard. His eyes swept the room, taking in the unfinished note, the phone still glowing faintly on the desk, the silence that had no echo. Caleb, inside Daniel, felt the moment something inside break. Not loudly, not with an outburst, but with a quiet so complete it rang in the ears. That silence hardened, packed into something sharp. The court's voice whispered, "Here." The path began. The scene froze. Snow kept falling outside the window, caught midair like flecks in a glass globe. Daniel's face was unreadable, but the stillness around him was already forming into intent. The image dissolved, and Caleb was back in the chair at the table, hands gripping the metal edges as though to stop himself from sliding away. No one spoke. Even the court let the silence stand. It was Daniel's silence now, and Caleb understood it in a way he never had before. The fog didn't creep this time. It snapped into place, pulling Caleb into it as though the court itself was tired of his hesitation. When the scene cleared, he was in Daniel's bedroom. The walls were bare except for a shelf with a row of old baseball trophies and a framed photo of him and Ethan at what looked like a summer camp. In it, they were both younger, laughing, arms hooked over each other's shoulders. That laughter felt so far away now it might as well have belonged to someone else. Caleb felt Daniel's body under him, the weight of sitting hunched over a desk in the dim amber light of a single lamp. A legal pad lay in front of him, a pen in his hand, though he hadn't written much. Every so often he'd tap the pen against the desk, slow and deliberate, like he was giving himself time to think through each possibility before putting it down in ink. The court's voice came low, as though this was evidence too sensitive to be spoken aloud. This is where intention took root. Daniel's thoughts were a current, slow but unstoppable. Caleb could feel them, not in words but in the cold logic of assembling something inevitable. No screaming, no wild impulse. Just the careful stacking of decisions, each one reinforcing the next until the outcome stood on its own, like a structure you could walk into. The plan was simple. It had to be. Accidents didn't need elaborate choreography, just the right place, the right time, and the right push. Daniel wrote a single word on the pad. Wexler, the lake road. Caleb knew it well. Narrow, winding, no streetlights for long stretches. In rain or ice, it became a treacherous snake of blacktop. The pen hovered. Next to Wexler, Daniel wrote, headlights, curve, brake. Caleb wanted to shout at him, to grab the pen and tear the page in half, but he was a passenger in this body, forced to watch the resolve take shape. Daniel wasn't thinking about punishment in the way courts did. He was thinking about balance, about evening the weight between what Caleb had taken and what he'd get in return. From the desk drawer, Daniel pulled a small flashlight, the kind you could hold in your palm. He clicked it on, then off again. In the dark, the after image of the beams still burned in Caleb's vision. He didn't need the court to explain. The flash of light would be enough to distract, to blind for a second on the rain-slick road. The rest, gravity and physics would handle. On the desk, the photo of him and Ethan caught the lamplight. Daniel's gaze landed there for a moment. The anger was there, but so was something deeper. An emptiness, the kind left when laughter is stolen and can't be put back. The scene shifted. Now they were in Daniel's car, engine idling. The rain had already started, pattering against the windshield. Wipers swept in a slow, steady rhythm, Daniel's hands rested on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. He waited. No music, no movement, just the sound of rain and the tick of the hazard lights, as if marking time for some unspoken countdown. Headlights appeared in the distance. Caleb recognized the shape instantly. His own sedan, the dull gleam of the hood catching the beam for an instant. Daniel's fingers closed around the flashlight. The court's voice cut through the hum of the engine. The law of the living weighs intention against circumstance. Here we weigh the full gravity of choice. Daniel flicked the flashlight on. Once. Twice. The beam cut through the rain like a blade. Caleb felt his own old self behind that wheel, saw the slight twitch of his hands on the steering wheel in reaction to the light. Then Daniel stepped out into the road. The rest Caleb already knew. The rain, the brakes, the skid, the sudden tilt of the world. The quiet after. The scene dissolved, leaving him back at the table, breath shallow. "You're showing me this like you're saying I deserved it," Caleb said. "We are showing you the weight," the court replied. "What others carry, they sometimes choose to return." Caleb swallowed, feeling the metallic taste of inevitability. And Daniel, what happens to him here? He will have his own room, his own record. That is not yours to witness. The wall began to fog again, but this time Caleb's stomach sank deeper. He knew where the next memory would lead, straight into the night of the accident, only from the moment after his own body had stopped breathing. The fog didn't so much gather this time as slam into him, like a wave hitting chest-deep water. Caleb staggered, though his chair hadn't moved, and then the world snapped into the night of the accident. Rain hammered the windshield in thick, slanted lines. The wipers groaned back and forth, struggling to keep pace. Headlights painted the wet road in shaky gold, refracting off 1,000 droplets. His hands, his old hands, gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to, the muscles in his forearms taut. The curve ahead was blind. He knew this road well enough to ease off the west, but his mind was elsewhere, half on the buzzing phone in the console, half on the thought of how soon he'd be home. Dry, safe, then light. A white beam cut across his vision, sharp and sudden. Reflex jerked the wheel. Tires hissed against the slick asphalt. The road tilted beneath him, and somewhere deep in his chest, the first ripple of panic spread. Through the rain, a figure stepped forward. Hood up, water running off the fabric in rivulets. Daniel. The beam of the flashlight blinked again, once, twice, like a heartbeat. And then Daniel stopped moving. Caleb's foot slammed on the brake. The sedan shuddered, tires fighting for grip. The world became angles and momentum, the steering wheel wrenching sideways, the seatbelt biting into his collarbone, the sound of metal folding in on itself. The impact was both instant and endless, a heavy thunk, followed by a silence that didn't feel like silence at all, more like the air had been sucked out, leaving a ringing void in its place. Then, stillness. Caleb's hands loosened on the wheel. His body leaned forward, breath shallow. Rain pattered on the hood in an oddly gentle rhythm. He tried to inhale, but the air no longer reached the bottom of his lungs. The smell of wet asphalt filled his head. A voice, not the court's, whispered at the edge of hearing. It wasn't in words. It was more like an open door somewhere behind him, a faint pull of wind in a hallway he hadn't noticed before. His vision dimmed, but it didn't close entirely. The headlights still burned through the rain, though they seemed further away now, as if receding down a tunnel. The steering wheel felt distant too, like it belonged to someone else. The pull grew stronger. In a blink, he was standing outside the car, on the wet road, looking at the crumpled hood. Rain fell through him without touching skin. Daniel was a few paces away, the flashlight dangling at his side. His face wasn't triumphant or even angry. It was carved into something harder, a mask of completion. Caleb called out, but the sound didn't leave his mouth. Daniel didn't look at him. Behind him, the air began to shimmer. The edges of the road blurred, the tree bending inward as though the forest itself wanted to close over the scene. In the shimmer, a faint light pulsed, steady, patient. The court's voice came then, close enough to feel along his spine. The living world releases you. Step forward. Caleb turned toward the light. For a moment, he thought about running back, about trying to re-enter the car, to force himself back into lungs and heartbeat. But the road, the rain, the wreckage, they already felt like someone else's story. He stepped. The shimmer swallowed him whole. The sound of rain was gone, replaced by the sterile hum of unseen lights. The floor beneath him was not asphalt but smooth gray tile. Ahead, a single door waited, half open. Through it, the long table, the ledger, the empty chairs. The court had been waiting all along. The door closed behind him without sound. Caleb stood in the sterile gray light, a faint hum in the air like an electric current somewhere just out of sight. The long table stretched before him exactly as he'd left it. Ledger in place, pen unmoving, the high-backed chairs arrayed in their perfect arc. Only now 3 of those chairs were no longer empty. The first was occupied by Mark, the boy from sophomore year whose backpack Caleb had locked to a bleacher. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking not at Caleb but slightly past him, as if observing something in the air. The second chair held the freshman Caleb had once mocked for his stutter. His eyes were calm, though the calm didn't feel like peace. The third, Caleb's stomach nodded. Ethan. Not the Ethan from that last winter morning. This Ethan was whole. His posture was straight, his face unshadowed, his clothes dry. But there was no smile. Only that steady gaze, the kind that made you feel like your excuses would slide off and land useless on the floor. The court's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Proceeding resumes, witnesses present, record open. Caleb's eyes flicked to the ledger. A new page had turned on its own. At the top, in that precise, unhurried script, Session 2, Aggregated Harms. The wall to his right began to cloud. This time, the gray didn't open into a single scene, but many, fragmented, stacked, overlapping. He saw himself in sophomore year, shoving a boy into a locker. He saw a group chat thread where his own words glowed in the light of a dozen laughing emoji reactions. He saw a cafeteria table where someone else made a small joke, and he doubled it into something sharper, louder, until the target's smile faded. Each moment barely lasted a breath before sliding into the next, but everyone left a residue, small weights pressing onto him until his chest felt tight. The living court requires proof of each act, the voice said. Here, the accumulation is proof. Caleb tried to focus on one scene to explain it, to pull it apart until it seemed harmless. But the fragments kept coming faster, not allowing space for defense. His breath shortened. He turned to the witnesses. Ethan's eyes didn't waver. Mark's hands remained still. The freshman tilted his head slightly, as though listening for whether Caleb had learned the sound of his own cruelty. Finally, the images stopped. The wall went blank. The court asked, "Do you dispute the record?" No, his voice was hoarse. But it wasn't all me, some of it. Other people laughed first. Participation is weight, the court interrupted. Initiation is weight. Amplification is weight. The measure changes, but the gravity remains. Caleb lowered his head. We proceed to specific testimony, the court said. Witness Carter. Ethan stood. His chair made no sound against the floor. He didn't move toward Caleb. He didn't need to. His voice, steady, almost quiet, filled the room without echo. You never asked what the poem was about. You never wondered why someone would write it down. Caleb swallowed. I didn't think. That's the problem, Ethan said. You thought about the laugh, not the person. The words landed heavier than shouting. The court didn't intervene. Ethan sat again. The silence afterward felt deliberate, as if the air itself had been told to hold still so the moment could sink all the way in. Caleb looked at the ledger. The pen moved without his touch, writing a single line. Acknowledged. The court's voice came once more. We are not finished. The wall began to fog again. Caleb braced himself, knowing that whatever came next would dig deeper than anything so far. The fog rose again, but this time it didn't open into a single doorway of memory. It came at him in rapid flashes, like shutters snapping in a dark room, each one exposing a different face, a different wound. First flash, he was in a gymnasium, the polished floor gleaming under fluorescent lights. A game had ended, and students milled around in the stands. Younger Caleb, his old self, leaned over the bleachers to shout something at a boy walking alone with a duffel bag. Caleb couldn't remember the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. The deliberate pitch that made sure everyone nearby heard. The boy froze mid-step, shoulders stiff, and then kept walking as if each step cost him something. Caleb felt the sting from inside the boy's chest now, the burn of trying to appear untouched while the heat climbed up his neck. Second flash, a classroom. He saw a girl sitting in the front row, her hair hiding half her face. Younger Caleb was at the back, whispering something to a friend just loud enough for her to hear. Her pencil scratched faster against the paper, her jaw tight. Through her, he felt the pressure of holding still, because turning around, reacting, would be surrender. Third flash, the locker hallway again, but dimmer, emptier. A freshman stood at his locker, carefully arranging books. Younger Caleb passed by, hooked a finger in the strap of his backpack, and yanked. The boy stumbled, papers spilling onto the floor. Caleb, inside the boy, felt the heat of humiliation flare in his cheeks, knowing that bending down to gather the papers made him look smaller, weaker. The flashes came faster now. A joke whispered during a group project, spreading in seconds until it was a silent consensus. She's weird. A mocking nickname that stuck to someone for the rest of the semester. A single roll of the eyes that made another student's voice falter in the middle of an answer. The court's voice threaded through the barrage. You remembered the ones that amused you. You forgot the ones that didn't. They remembered both. The images slowed, merging into a single scene. It was the cafeteria, noisy, chaotic, the smell of fries and reheated pizza in the air. Caleb stood near a table, surrounded by a small crowd. At the center sat a boy he barely recalled, a quiet type always reading. Caleb had made a remark about his clothes, something about a thrift store in 2 generations out of style. It had been quick, tossed off. The crowd laughed. From inside the boy's skin, Caleb now felt the difference between a laugh at a joke and a laugh at a person. It was heavier, more deliberate, like being stamped with an ink you couldn't wash off. The boy didn't look up. He just closed his book and walked away, the tray untouched. Caleb felt the deep hollowness that followed, a sense that the room itself had turned against him, not in rage but in quiet permission. The scene dissolved. The room of the court came back into focus. 4 more chairs had filled. Each held a witness, faces Caleb recognized only faintly, as if memory had filed them under background. They weren't background now. The ledger turned another page. At the top, the script read, "Pattern established." Caleb's throat was dry. How many more? As many as required for you to see the weight not as a single stone, but as the wall it built, the court said. His gaze moved across the witnesses. None of them looked angry. That absence cut deeper than fury. It meant they didn't need emotion to validate the truth. The truth stood on its own. The wall began to fog again, slower this time, as if preparing something more deliberate. Caleb felt a coldness settle in his gut, because he knew without being told that the next memory would not be about a stranger. The fog spread slow this time, like smoke curling from something deep underground. Caleb felt it reach for him, not just to show him something, but to pull something out. When the scene formed, it wasn't in a hallway, cafeteria, or a courtyard. It was in a mirror. At first, he thought it was simply his own reflection. Caleb Morgan, 18, hair damp from rain, shadows under the eyes. But the longer he looked, the more the face began to change. The jawline narrowed, the eyes softened. His hair grew a little longer, lighter. Then the skin tone shifted, freckles appearing across the nose. He was looking at Ethan. The court's voice wove into the air. The distance between you and those you harmed, it is not as wide as you believed. Step forward. Caleb obeyed without meaning to. As he leaned toward the glass, the surface dissolved, and he fell, not forward, but through. Suddenly, he wasn't just seeing Ethan. He was Ethan again, but it felt different this time. The court didn't freeze the moment like before. Instead, he was moving through days, hours, seconds that weren't all sharp with humiliation. He was sitting at a lunch table, eating quietly. He was walking to class, head down. He was at home, in a room with walls the color of sky. Caleb felt the shape of Ethan's whole world, the quiet routines, the small escapes, the brief moments of safety between the storms. And then, in the middle of it, his own voice would drop in, mocking, laughing, and those safe spaces collapsed. But the mirror didn't stop there. Now the freckles disappeared, the hair darkened, his shoulders broadened. He looked down and saw a baseball cap in his hands. Mark. Then the cap was gone, replaced by trembling fingers over a stack of loose-leaf papers. The stuttered boy. Then it shifted again. A girl clutching her binder to her chest, eyes fixed straight ahead as whispers followed. Caleb's sense of self began to unravel. The boundaries between him and them blurred. Every time the scene changed, he felt the same spike of alertness in the body, hyper-aware of who was near, where the next blow might come from, what he'd have to swallow to get through the next hour. And then every time he'd hear his own voice, sometimes sharp, sometimes casual, but always cutting. The court's voice came low, steady. Every wound you gave lives here. The faces kept cycling. Some he knew, some he had to dig into memory to recall. Some he couldn't name at all, but the pain in their bodies was real, and he felt it as if it were happening to him now. Minutes or hours, he couldn't tell, passed like this. Each shift eroded him further until he didn't know if there was any Caleb left at all, or if he'd been reduced to a collage of every person he'd ever hurt. Finally, the fog pulled back. He was in the court again, hunched over in the metal chair, chin clammy. The witness's eyes were on him, not accusing, not forgiving, just seeing. The ledger's pen moved on its own, self-recognized in the other. Progress noted. Caleb let out a shuddering breath. He didn't know whether to feel relief or dread at the word progress. The court said, "We proceed. The chain is not yet complete." The wall began to cloud again, darker this time, as if what was coming next would cut deeper than any single memory. The fog rolled in, thicker than before, like ink poured into water, swallowing the edges of the court until there was nothing but the long table, the ledger, and the empty space between Caleb and the witnesses. Only one figure moved. Ethan stood. The other witnesses remained seated, their stillness making his movement feel heavier, more deliberate. He didn't step closer. He didn't need to. The distance between them was charged enough to bridge without motion. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. "I'm not here to ask for an apology," Ethan said. The words caught Caleb off guard. His throat tightened as if the sentence had reached into it. Ethan continued, "I'm here because you don't understand. Not really, not yet." Caleb wanted to argue. "I've seen it, I've felt it," but Ethan's gaze stopped him cold. "You've been shown moments," Ethan said. "Scenes you can survive because they have a beginning and an end. But my life wasn't a series of isolated moments, Caleb. It was one long hallway, and every step I took in it, I wondered where the next hit would come from. Even when you weren't there, you were there." The court was silent. This was Ethan's testimony now, unbroken. "You took the air out of my days," Ethan went on. "You taught me to measure myself by the smallest version of me, the one that could slip under the radar, go unseen, maybe survive. You laughed, and everyone else learned to laugh too. That's how it works, right? Power isn't just what you do, it's what you make normal." Caleb's hands curled into fists on the table. "I didn't know." Ethan's voice sharpened just enough to cut. "You did. Maybe not the depth of it, maybe not the final cost, but you knew enough to keep going." The room felt smaller now. The gray light pressed in from all sides. Caleb's chest ached, not from shame alone, but from the weight of realizing that for Ethan, there was no end-of-scene release. Ethan's eyes softened, but the softness wasn't forgiveness. Daniel gave me his loyalty. You gave me your cruelty. One built me up, one hollowed me out. Guess which one stayed longer? Caleb opened his mouth, but nothing came. Ethan stepped back, not to retreat, but to return to his seat. That's all I have, he said, for now. The court's voice entered the space again, low and resonant. Testimony recorded, weight increased, the chain nears its final link. The ledger's pen scratched out a single sentence, impact acknowledged by both parties. Caleb stared at the ink until the wall began to fog again, darker than before. He had the sickening sense that the next link in the chain would be Daniel, and that whatever Daniel said wouldn't be about revenge anymore. The fog didn't drift in this time. It arrived like a locked door swinging open. Caleb felt the shift in the room before he saw it, the subtle tilt in the air when something heavier than memory enters. Daniel stood in the witness's place. He was exactly as Caleb remembered from the road. Hood pulled back now, hair damp, but not from rain, his face carved in stillness. No anger burned there, no satisfaction, just a kind of unblinking steadiness, as if he'd rehearsed nothing and yet knew exactly what he would say. The court's voice broke the silence. Witness Hughes, you may speak. Daniel's eyes locked on Caleb. You want me to say I hated you? That would be easier for you to understand. Hate fits in a box. You can call it rage, call it impulse. Say it clouded my judgment. But I didn't hate you, Caleb. The words landed cold, unexpected. Caleb's shoulders stiffened. Daniel took a step closer to the table. I watched you hollow someone out until all they had left were the walls they built around themselves. I watched my best friend disappear one crack at a time. You never noticed because you didn't need to. The crowd's laughter was enough for you. Caleb opened his mouth, but Daniel cut him off. When Ethan died, I didn't want revenge in the way people think of it. I wanted the equation to balance. You took something you could never give back, so I took the only thing I could reach. He paused, letting the weight of the admission hang in the air. When I stepped into the road that night, I wasn't hoping you'd suffer. I just wanted you gone. Out of hallways, out of someone else's story. The room seemed to draw in around the two of them. The witnesses were silent, the court still. Daniel's voice lowered. And now you're here. I don't know if that means anything. I don't know if this place can make you feel the way Ethan felt every day. But I do know this, what I did to you, it's the only thing I've done that I'd do again. The statement hit Caleb harder than shouting ever could. There was no venom, no thrill, just truth, flat and heavy. The court finally spoke. Testimony recorded. Cause acknowledged. Effect continues. Daniel stepped back into his chair, gaze never leaving Caleb until he sat. Caleb couldn't look at him. The ledger in front of him now bore a new line in fresh ink. Harm met with harm, cycle remains unbroken. He stared at the words until they blurred. Somewhere deep inside, he realized that the court's work wasn't just to make him see. It was to force him to decide whether that cycle would end with him or through him. The wall began to fog again. What came next, he knew, would not be about anyone else. It would be about him. The fog didn't ease in this time. It collapsed over the room like a curtain dropping at the end of a play. For a long moment, there was no sound, no movement. Even the faint hum that usually lived in the air of the court seemed to pause. Then the ledger in front of Caleb snapped shut on its own. The court's voice came, deep and resonant. Testimony concluded, witnesses heard, record complete. The chairs lining the ark remained filled. Mark, the stuttered boy, the girl with the binder, others whose names Caleb barely remembered. Ethan, Daniel, each pair of eyes fixed on him, not to sway the decision, but to witness it. A single line of light appeared on the wall opposite him. It widened, unfolded, and became a doorway. But beyond it was no familiar world, only a shifting haze of shadow and pale glow. Caleb Morgan, the court said, each syllable deliberate. You are not judged by what the living court allowed. You are not weighed by the outcome of another's hand. You are measured by the gravity of the harm you carried into others' days and the weight you left them to carry alone. Caleb's breath came shallow. So what happens to me now? You will walk the halls of regret, the court answered, a place where each step is a day lived in the bodies you harmed until the distance between you and them is gone. Caleb's mind tried to form protest. How long? What if I change? What if I've already changed? But no words made it to his mouth. The court continued, there is no clock in these halls. You will leave when the weight you feel matches the weight you gave. Some find their balance. Some do not. The door of light brightened. A faint sound drifted from within. Footsteps on tile, the quiet sob of someone alone, the thud of a locker door. All sounds he knew, all sounds he had made happen. You're saying this is forever, he said, though it felt more like admitting it to himself. We are saying it is yours, the court replied. The witnesses rose, not in triumph, not in vengeance, just in finality. Ethan's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than the rest, unreadable. Daniel didn't look away until the door began to pull Caleb toward it. The light swallowed the table, the ledger, the court, and then Caleb stepped forward into the sound of his own echoes. The light faded, but it didn't disappear. It thinned, stretching into pale lines across the floor and ceiling, like the faint seams of a place that had no true walls. Caleb stood in a corridor that seemed to bend without turning, stretching away in both directions until it vanished into haze. The floor was tile, scuffed, but spotless, echoing faintly with every step. The sound wasn't just in his ears. It landed in his chest, each footfall a muted thud he could feel. Along the walls, evenly spaced, were doors. Each was the same. Narrow, matte gray, no handle, no number. Only when he drew near did a faint impression rise on the surface, a name pressed into the material like the memory of handwriting. The first he passed read Sarah W. The court's voice reached him, not from behind, not from ahead, but woven into the air. Each door opens to a day you shaped. You will walk it as they did. You will walk it until you understand the weight in their steps. Caleb stopped at Sarah's door. The name shimmered faintly, like breath on glass. Without touching it, the door yielded, swinging inward on soundless hinges. He stepped through. The world shifted, and suddenly he was smaller. Not in height, but in how the air met him. Hallway noise pressed in from every side. The chatter of friends that didn't include him. The slam of a locker 2 feet away that made him flinch before he realized it wasn't aimed at him. Caleb, Sarah, kept her eyes on the notebook she carried, her fingers tight around it. In this skin, every sense was heightened for survival. The quick scan of faces at the end of the hall, the careful avoidance of the spots where trouble usually waited. Then, the moment. His own voice, young, sharp, calling her name with mock cheer. The memory pulled him toward it, forcing him to feel how Sarah's spine stiffened before she even turned. He saw himself, smirking, a few friends beside him, yank the notebook from her hands and flip it open. Her poetry, her sketches, all held up in front of strangers, and then the laughter. Inside her, Caleb felt the breath leave in a single rush, not because of the words themselves, but because something private had been stolen, turned inside out, and pinned to the wall for show. She didn't shout, didn't grab for it, just waited for it to be over. And it was. For him, not for her. The scene reset. The same day, the same theft, the same laughter, over and over. On the 4th time, Caleb found himself whispering, "Please, no," though he wasn't sure if it was for her sake or his own. Only when he felt the heavy knot in Sarah's stomach, a weight that stayed after the bell rang, did the door finally open again. He stepped out into the hall, shaking. More doors waited, more names. Some he remembered clearly, some made him pause, digging into memory for a face. Others he couldn't place at all, and that was somehow worse, knowing he'd left marks on people he'd forgotten entirely. The court's voice came again. The hall is long. The wait will be longer. You will walk until you no longer measure distance in steps, but in the understanding you carry. Caleb turned toward the next door. The name on it was already starting to glow. He reached for it, knowing he wouldn't be allowed to stop. The hall stretched on, door after door, swallowing him into borrowed lives until he stopped counting. Caleb's sense of self had thinned into something fragile, like paper that had been handled too many times. Each step was heavier than the last, not from fatigue, but from carrying the residue of every breath, every heartbeat, every wound he had worn for someone else. Then he saw it, a door unlike the others. No gray surface, no faintly pressed letters. This one was white, bone white, and its glow was steady, unblinking. As he approached, words slowly surfaced on its face, black and deliberate. Caleb stopped. His body, whatever passed for a body here, resisted. His chest tightened, a reflex born of knowing what lay beyond. He had been here before, or thought he had. But the hall had never lied to him, and if it had brought him here again, it meant something was different this time. The court's voice came from nowhere, softer than he'd ever heard it. You have seen this day from the inside. You have seen it through the eyes of the living who found him. Now you will walk it as yourself, as you were, while knowing what you know. The door opened. He was back in the school hallway. Senior year Caleb, alive, laughing with friends by his locker. He knew the date now. He knew the time. And somewhere, blocks away, Ethan was writing his unfinished note. The knowledge pressed on him like a weight in his ribs. He could feel both timelines at once, the casual, thoughtless flow of his own morning, and the quiet collapse happening elsewhere. Someone beside him made a joke about Ethan, harmless to them, just another brick in the wall. But Caleb, present Caleb, felt the double edge of it. He tried to stop himself, to stay silent, and then the moment happened anyway. The words left his mouth, not cruel enough to seem monstrous, not soft enough to be nothing. Just the right pitch to get a laugh. And the laugh came, as it always had, warm and hollow at once. He wanted to scream at the younger him, "Don't, just shut up, walk away." But this wasn't a scene he could rewrite. This was a scar he had to stand in until he could feel the shape of it from both sides. The loop, the scene replayed, the same hallway, the same line, the same laugh, over and over. On the fourth time, he began to notice the other faces, the students passing by who weren't laughing but weren't stopping it either. On the fifth, he noticed Daniel at the far end, watching. By the sixth, he could barely force himself to speak the line, yet the memory made him say it. By the seventh, he understood. This loop wasn't to make him feel guilt. It was to make him see how much space his words took in other people's lives. How a single throwaway moment for him filled whole days for someone else. When the door finally opened behind him, he didn't step through right away. He stood in the hallway one more time, letting the silence after the laugh stretch longer than it ever had before. Only then did he walk out. The white door closed without sound. Caleb stood before it, breathing in the thin, steady air of the corridor. The court's voice returned. The halls do not end until you stop asking how much longer. You are closer now, but the wait remains. Caleb looked down the corridor. More doors waited, but their glow seemed dimmer. For the first time, he didn't see them as punishments. He saw them necessary. The corridor had changed. Caleb couldn't say how, but the endlessness he'd felt before had softened into something finite. The air was lighter, though it still carried the scent of chalk and damp paper. The doors no longer glowed in accusation. They simply waited, patient, unjudging. He walked. No rush, no counting of steps. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was space. Space to think, space to breathe. And then, ahead, he saw it. A door of pale, worn wood, unlike the others. Its surface was carved with no names, only a single phrase, etched deep enough to cast shadows in the grain. When you speak, you leave something behind. The court's voice rose, not from the walls, but from inside him. This is the threshold. Cross, and you may carry what you've learned. Remain, and you may keep learning until you are certain you will not forget. Caleb hesitated. If I cross, where do I go? Wherever the weight belongs next, the court said. He placed a hand on the door. The wood was warm, not comforting, but alive. When it swung open, there was no blinding light, no thunder of judgment, just the familiar scent of rain on asphalt and a faint glow like dawn behind the clouds. Outside, a street stretched away, quiet and empty. He stepped onto it, his footsteps soft against the wet ground. No crowd, no witnesses, only his own shadow walking ahead of him. For the first time since the hall, he spoke aloud, not to defend, not to excuse, but to offer. The words were simple, steady, and left no room for laughter. Every word, every act is a mark. Make yours something you'd want remembered. The air carried it forward. Maybe no one heard. Maybe someone would. Caleb kept walking, and the door behind him closed, not with finality, but with a promise. The hall was still there and always would be, for anyone who needed to learn the weight of what they'd left behind. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.